by the way, entheos is to be filled with the Spirit of God, is you have to be aiming at something worth aiming at. And this is literally the case, the more vital the thing is that you're aiming for, the more positive emotion you experience when you notice that you're moving towards a goal. And so one of the things this means is that if you don't have an aim, and even an ethical aim, because you're aiming up, right? You're aiming at something better. If you don't have an aim and an ethical aim, you literally cannot experience any positive emotion. And more than that, the higher your aim, now that assumes that you're not making things impossibly difficult for yourself, but the higher your aim, the higher the more intense the positive emotion associated with evidence of progress. And so then what you might derive from that, if you were thinking about setting your life up properly, is that you should aim at the highest possible thing. And of course, then that begs the question, what is the highest possible thing? And that's partly what the Sermon on the Mount is about. The highest possible good is a multifaceted phenomenon. It's not just one thing. It might be beauty, for example, but it also might be truth, and it might be love, and it might be courage, and it might be integrity, right? You can see all these positive moral virtues aggregated into a single thing. It might be the call to adventure. It might be the call to wisdom. It might be the fear of God. There's all sorts of elements that make up what's best. And so you can't reduce it in some sense. You certainly can't reduce it, for example, to something simple like compassion. It's not a one-dimensional virtue. It's something very difficult to attain, a balance of many virtues or a sum of many virtues. And so God was often defined classically as the summum bonum, the sum of all good things. And this is a definition, not a statement of belief. It's a definition, and that's worth knowing too. So imagine that you do know, we all know that there are good things. And so that's an interesting category because there are many different things that are good, but they share the common feature of being good. And so then the question is, well, what is the essence of the common feature of good? And one classical answer to that would be, well, that's a good enough definition of God. And then you can ask yourself too, well, if you're pursuing things that are good, and hopefully you are, not that you necessarily are, because people can pursue evil and harmful things too. But if you're going to pursue something that's good, well, why wouldn't you pursue the sum of all that's good? Why? And especially, there's another way of thinking about it too, especially because you're betting your life on your actions. You know, I was out on jet skis this morning and I thought, I could die on this. I could crash into a boat and I'd just be dead. And then I thought, well, yeah, it's worth it to zip around out here to take that risk. But the fundamental truth of the matter is, because of the mortal conditions of your limited existence, you're betting your life on what you do all the time, in maybe a rather small way, but often not so small, because people do die in the pursuit of what they're pursuing. And so you might ask, well, what's worth betting your life on, betting your sanity on, betting your family on, betting your future on? And why should it be less than the sum of all that is good? Why would you do that? Now, one answer is because it's a heavy responsibility to pursue the highest possible goal. And you might think, well, I'm afraid of that responsibility, and fair enough. But if you think I don't want that responsibility, you might want to think again, because it isn't obvious what you have on your side to justify your miserable life to yourself. We all are very aware of our own flaws, and we're also very prone to torture ourselves with our own consciences. And we probably do that more to ourselves than we do it to other people. Most of the people I know who aren't narcissistic are much harder judges of themselves than they are of other people. They're often less likely to do good things for themselves than they are to do good things for other people. And that's because they're acutely aware of their multitude of flaws. And then you might say, well, how is it that you can contend in a realistic way with your multitude of flaws? And you might say, well, you could develop the self-respect that would emerge as a consequence of bearing a heavy responsibility. And I actually don't think there is any other solution than that. And I know, I've seen people in very dire circumstances, who've been brought low by all sorts of things, including their own foolishness and malevolence. And one of the things they do have to rely on in such situations is the fact that they've been of some service, well, to themselves, but mostly to other people, genuine service, right? And I also think that if you're mature and you have some experience, one of the things you also notice is that there are few pleasures in life as deep as recognizing that something that you've done, escaping from your bitterness and And as a precondition for this, that something that you've done has genuinely been of service to someone else, especially in service to their continued development. And so, there are a lot of cynics about people who run businesses, for example, that you're just exploiting your workers. The bloody Marxists think that all the time. But if you run a prosperous and reasonable and productive and generous business, one of the true pleasures, it's the same if you're an academic or anyone in a position to mentor, one of the genuine pleasures of life, and it's a deep pleasure, is the opportunity to take young people who have real promise and to open doors for them and help their development. And that's a much deeper pleasure and also a much more useful solve for your conscience than any trivial profit you might derive from exploiting them, which is also not a very effective or efficient way of dealing with anyone around you. It's like, if I can cooperate with you and we can align our interests and I can help you move forward and you can do that, vice versa, even if you're in a junior relationship to me, we're going to do way better together than we are if I'm just telling you what to do and you're resentfully dragging your miserable carcass along because you have to. That's no way to conduct your affairs. And no one wants to be around anyone who does that. And so the responsibility is, it might be worth the effort and the attempt, and there's other reasons to think that too. So imagine that you go different places and you do different things. And one of the things that happens as a consequence of facing that challenge is you start to develop, because you get more informed, right? You meet more people, you have a wider social network, you learn more skills, you gather more descriptive information, you flesh out your knowledge of geography and philosophy and history and beauty and all of that. That's all information. But that isn't all that happens to you when you challenge yourself, especially if you take the challenge on voluntarily. So one of the other things that happens is if you stress yourself, challenge yourself, physiologically. So you put yourself in situations that you hadn't been in before that demand something new of you. New genes turn on and start to code for new proteins, and they build new parts of you. And so it's as if there's a reservoir inside of you of biological possibility that's a consequence of your inheritance in the deepest sense, but it will not be transformed into actuality unless there's a demand. And then you could imagine further that maybe you're facing a challenge and you don't want it, right? And you reject it. And so you're afraid and you're running. Then the genes that turn on inside you are going to turn you into a prey animal and something that's hiding. But if you face that voluntarily, then that puts you in an entirely different psychophysiological state. The data on this are quite clear. And that's going to craft you into the sort of person who's more and more able to voluntarily confront larger and larger challenges.